Matt Walsh is with us now. He is the host of the Matt Walsh Show and also a senior writer at the Daily Wire. Mr. Walsh, thanks for making the time.
Hey, Buck, thanks for having me.
So you have separated yourself from many others online by being willing to ask questions about this and to actually criticize the lockdown. Where do you think we are now as a nation, which is different from how it might feel for people here in New York? As a nation at this stage of this lockdown, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that look, no rational person denies that it's been very bad, to put it mildly. Many people have died. It's obviously a serious issue, as I have never denied, and I think most of the people that are criticizing the lockdowns don't deny that, despite how we're portrayed as being deniers, virus deniers, or whatever the stupid phrase is that's being used. So it's obviously a bad situation, but at the same time, we're in the middle of an economic crash, and we're looking at 30 million unemployed by next week. By the time the numbers come out next week, many more than 30 million. On top of the destruction of our civil liberties and basically the effective suspension of the Bill of Rights across the country. And so I think we can officially look at this and say that as the saying goes, the cure has been worse than the disease. And I'm also not convinced, and based on the data that I've read and based on what we're hearing from the so-called experts, I'm not convinced that, in fact, we have saved any lives in the long run by these lockdowns, because unless we're going to stay locked down until there's a vaccine, if there is even a vaccine, but unless we're going to stay locked down, unless we're prepared to do this for a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever, however long it takes, we're going to have to go back out into the world at some point when the virus is still there. Not only still there, but the virus is going to be, when we emerge back into the world, whenever that is, the virus is not only going to still be there, but it's going to be more prevalent and more widely spread than it was when we went in. So we're going to have to face that eventually, and now we're going to face it with a destroyed economy, whereas before maybe we could have faced it with a still healthy economy, and I just don't see how that is a better situation for us.
What do you think of the president's decision to allow it to be left up to the states, but then the president also seems to suggest that it is also his decision at the same time, which I feel like he's giving himself a little bit of the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, I think listen, if anybody wants someone to defend the White House's approach to this entire thing, I'm not the guy for that. I think his communication on this throughout has been pretty abysmal. He seems to change his mind almost by the day. I mean, you look at he was talking last week about we're going to open up the states. We're going to do it in a thoughtful and considered way through phases. Okay, I'm with that. I mean, I actually don't think that we need to take as long as what he proposed. But then the next day he was all caps tweeting "liberate the states," right? And so, and then Georgia says, "Okay, let's liberate," and then he says, "No, that's too soon." So to me, it's confusing, and I do think he's kind of doing the worst of both worlds. For him to come out and say, "Well, I could open the states if I want to," of course that's not true. First of all, there's no reason to say it because it's not true. He doesn't have the power to just open the states on his own. But now he's now taking ownership of whatever happens, and the economic collapse and everything.
There are some faulty arguments out there that I've heard some conservatives make about the interstate commerce clause means that the president can just dictate to the states. But that's actually a progressive argument that has been used to violate and distort the Constitution and federal law for a long time. So I certainly wouldn't want to see Trump do that. When do you think, though? I mean, we came in with Governor Whitmer in Michigan. We've had mothers being arrested in front of their kids for playing in a park, even though now we find out that air and sunlight and humidity are actually killing the virus. We've seen all kinds of petty abuses of power. Do you think that we're going to head to a point where people are just going to have to non-comply, or are most state governments going to figure out that we have a limit with this?
I think we already are seeing at least the mobilization, the protests in certain states, like in Michigan, and I think that's very encouraging sign, in my view. There's a limit. You can't lie. You just can't. That's the other problem with the lockdowns. Anyone who wants to extend the lockdowns for months on end, you can't do it. People aren't going to do that. They're not going to stay locked in their home that long, especially in the United States of America. We still do cherish our freedoms. I think probably not as much as we should, but we still do cherish them. So it's just not going to work. And this stuff that we're hearing now about about how, as you mentioned, the sunlight and air being a good way to slow the transmission of the virus. Now, it's good that we're now getting good data on that, but I think any rational, logical person knew all along that obviously it's better to be outside in the sun than to be cramped up inside with recycled, recirculated air where you're in close quarters with people. So all this freaking out and panicking people are doing over, for example, people going to the beach in Florida. I've been saying all along, it seems to me that the beach is probably the safest possible place to be, as long as you're not right up on top of other people. But if you're giving yourself a little bit of distance, you're on the beach, you're in the sun, there's a lot of wind and air circulation. It seems like a pretty safe place to be, and certainly better than being, potentially locked in a home.
Yeah, I just on that beach thing, I remember people were saying, "Oh, all these spring breakers came back with COVID-19," and I don't want to be that guy, but and Matt, you don't strike me as somebody who went too wild on spring break. I don't know, but I remember spring break, and it's not the long walks on the beach that might get people to give each other COVID-19.
Yeah, exactly. I had the same thought. I mean, how do you think these kids were transmitting it?
It wasn't parasailing. I can tell everybody that.
Right, and I mean, yeah, exactly, and I don't think it was just tossing the frisbee around either. But even with that, I mean, there from what I read, there weren't that many spring breakers that came back with the virus.
No, just a few dozen, I think, was what I saw. Yeah.
Yeah, so I actually thought that was kind of encouraging, considering this was in the early days of the outbreak, and this is spring break, and people are pretty close and intimate with each other. We'll just leave it at that. And for it not to spread wildly and out of control, I think was kind of a good sign. Although it also tells us that we know this, that younger people are not as affected by it, which is why it never made sense to me. Look, younger people are not as affected by it. It's not as fatal for them. They're not as likely to transmit it. That's what the data tells us. We also know that younger, healthy people, they're the primary ones in the workforce, especially in some of these service jobs that are being decimated right now. So, and meanwhile, you've got older people who are most susceptible to it. Many of them are retired anyway or in nursing homes. So we had everybody stay home. I mean, why not have the people stay home who were probably staying home anyway because they're not working, and then let the people, most of whom are in the less susceptible groups, go to work? The strategy doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, which is close to what Sweden has done, which everyone was saying. I mean, I remember people were saying Sweden's going to learn the hard way. They're heading for disaster. And I was like, well, let's see. And we've seen, and it actually is not a disaster. And now their top epidemiologist for Stockholm is saying that they think they're going to be at herd immunity in a matter of weeks. But Matt, before we go, I just want one more for you. You're a Catholic. I'm a Catholic. I watched Easter service on Sunday. Just we can't do that. I mean, we can't actually go to Mass. We can't celebrate the Eucharist in that way. Just what have you been doing?
Yeah, well, the same thing as everybody else. We've been live streaming the services on Sunday, and it's nice that we're able to do that, these days. But I don't consider it a substitute for the real thing, and I am a little concerned. We know that church attendance is already dwindling considerably in this country for many decades. I'm wondering if this is going to be the nail in the coffin for a lot of churches because, number one, they've been going without donations for a month now or more. And number two, I think, are there going to be more people who say, well, apparently you can just stay home and sit on your couch and watch it anyway. There's no point in going back. So that's another aspect of this that I'm worried about.
Yeah, so, the virtual Eucharist is not getting it done for you.
Not quite. It's like I said, it's not quite as good as the real in-person experience.
Matt Walsh, everybody, check out his show, The Matt Walsh Show, which you can download on podcast. Also, writing at thedailywire.com. Matt, all the best to you and yours. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, Team Buck, thank you so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you like this video, please click that little thumbs up button so then it will log as liked. And also, if you want to see more great content from The First, please click subscribe.